Hey everyone, and welcome back. Once again, we're in the Sparkle Void, and we're still in the medieval time period, although we're a little bit later along than my last video with the Temple Rings. A couple of days ago, Courtney over at Opus Eleni posted a really great tutorial for a very basic method for making veil pins using pre-made pins, and she used glass beads specifically in the tutorial, and glue. And it's a great tutorial if you are if you're not quite ready to start wire work. I highly recommend using her tutorial. She and I were talking about it, and we're going to call this, Veil Pins 201. And I'm going to go through not and the only other method, but I'm going to go through a method of making veil pins using wire and doing all of the steps, including, well, you'll see as we go through. Let me not get ahead of myself. Anyway, I'm going to show you two different styles that are still both very easy to make, but they are easier if you've already done some wire work or if you know how to do stuff with wire, and definitely if you have the tools, which I will also go over in a second. So I'm going to do two styles. I've got this one right here, which is just a very plain and simple wrapped wire. And then there's this one, which is very similar, but it's got a bead in here. So those are the two styles I want to show you guys how to make, and let's get into it.
So to make these pins, I am going to need some wire. Both of the wires I am working with today are 18 gauge. One is a silver coated copper wire and the other is a brass wire. I've also got my jeweler's anvil, and I'm going to need a hammer to go with that. I've got wire cutters and a couple different types of pliers, including needle nose, flat nose, and a set of nylon pliers. These are my old ones, so they're getting a little rough on the inside. I've also got a set of files. You only need one. I just happen to have an sorted set. And for the second style of pins, you're also going to need some beads. I've got several different kinds and multiple boxes of them, as you can see. They are a mix of metal beads, semi-precious stones, and glass. They aren't all specifically for veil pins, especially the ones that are not round, as you can see, the chip styles. What I am going to be using are going to be the agate beads in this box. They are a kind of pinky red and green mixed together, so they're a little fun pop of color depending on which side of the bead is visible. I'm going to keep these close by and put my other boxes away. So that's all you need to get started, and we're going to work on this simple style first. I'm going to be using my silver coated wire. It's not real silver, it's just silver colored. This is a copper coated wire, as I mentioned, which means it is a very soft wire, which is important for doing this style of pin. I'm cutting my piece about 3.5 inches or 7 centimeters, and I actually want to have 3 when I'm finished, including the one that's already made, so that's why I'm cutting 2 pieces right now. These measurements are not 100% exact, I'll be honest. I'm not super worried about having every single one being perfectly uniform because they're handmade, so they're not going to be perfectly exactly cookie cutter copies. So what I want is to have about 2 inches to be the main body or shaft of the pin, and what I'm doing here is marking about 2¼ inches away with my piece of tape, and why I'm doing that is so I know where to stop hammering. So as I mentioned, this is my little jeweler's anvil. It's just a very heavy, about 3/4 inch thick piece of steel. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to harden this part of the pin. And I do that by simply hammering it repeatedly. And that will harden it as I go. So because this is a soft metal, it's copper as I mentioned before, it will take a while to do this. But the longer or the more time I spend doing this, the stronger the pin will be. I generally don't worry about keeping it perfectly round. If it ends up a little square, I don't mind. What I'm doing last is just repeatedly hammering the very end of it to just flatten what will eventually become the point of the pin and get it, as I said, up flatter than the rest of it, because what I'm going to do, well, you'll see in a second. Remember that second piece of wire I cut? Here are the two side by side, and you can see how much of a difference hardening it by hammering it made. So the unworked piece, I can bend it with practically no force at all. The worked piece, I can still bend it a little bit, but it does not go anywhere near as far, and it takes more force. So once I am satisfied with how much I have hardened the pin, what I'm going to do is I'm going to peel off that little piece of tape and start working on the head of the pin. I'm going to use my needle nose pliers, and at just above where I finished hardening it, and you can tell when you look at it, there'll be a point where it goes from very shiny to duller, which is where I did all of the hammering. And I am just going to make as tiny an eyelet as I possibly can to be the very top of my pin. As you can see, tiny eyelet. I'm gonna use my nylon pliers just to flatten it and get the point where the wire crosses over itself a little flatter. And then all I'm going to do is just wrap the wire around itself. And this is why I want that very soft wire for this style, because the softer the wire, the easier it is to wrap it in a very tight coil without needing to heat the wire up or do anything else to it. And it can be hand worked with just tools like this. So, as I said, all I'm going to do, just keep wrapping. I'm using my flat pliers here to guide the wire around the pin and also keep it a nice tight spiral. I am going to use my needle nose pliers just to curve the very end, because it'll make it a little bit easier to get it close rather than have that little tiny last bit sticking out away from it. That makes it really hard to get a nice smooth end curve to my wire. So doing it beforehand is definitely the way to go. Once I am happy with the spiral, that's pretty much it. We're almost done now. With the finished length of my pin is about 2 inches of pinnable area plus a little extra. And now the only thing that I've got left to do is finishing. I am going to give it a tiny little hammer back on my jeweler's anvil just to kind of smoosh the coil together a little bit, and also to make extra sure that the very end of the wire is not sticking out too far. And then all I've got to do now is sharpen it. So I'm going to go back to my wire cutters, and I'm going to cut at an angle along where I flattened the end of the pin earlier. And doing this, cutting this little wedge off like that, just makes it easier and reduces the amount of time I need to spend filing it to get a good point. I do want to ensure that I get a nice long area that will be the sharpened point. And by long, I mean about between 1/8 of an inch and 3/16. I'm not making this super long. And then it's just a matter of filing, and a little bit more filing until I get a nice point, and I don't have to worry about the very tip of my pin being wider than the rest of it. And there we go. This one is all finished, and this is a very, very simple style, as I mentioned. Very easy to do and can be found both for veil pins and regular dress or clothing pins too. One thing I do want to make sure is that I don't have any burrs on the tip, which is possible, so I'm just giving it a little bit extra to make sure it'll go into my linen smoothly. And now for the second style with the bead. This starts out pretty much the exact same way as the other one, although for this I am going to use my brass wire. I'm cutting the same length as before, 3.5 inches or 7 centimeters. And again, I'm going to mark myself about 2¼ inches from one end. Brass is a harder wire than copper, so the hardening process is not going to take as long, which is one advantage to brass, but because it's harder, I also can't bend it even when it's not hardened the same way I can with the copper wire. I'm doing the same thing I did before as well with making a flat part at the end. And then I'm going to find my point where I stopped hammering the wire and just put a corner in it or a bend in it rather than making an eyelet loop. I'm going to put one of my agate beads on it, but unfortunately when I flattened the end or the tip of the bead of the wire, I made it a little too wide to fit through the hole in the bead. And when I hardened my wire, I made it too hard to cut with my little wire clips here. Luckily I've got something stronger on hand, and those are my tin snips. These are actually a scissor style cutter rather than just the pinch style of the wire cutters, although they are serrated, so I'm going to have to do some extra filing to get rid of those serration marks. Did I say a little bit of filing? I actually meant a lot. And I also want to make sure that the point of my pin isn't bent out of shape either. Once I can finally get my bead on, I am just going to curl the wire around it, and I am also going to be a little bit picky about the shape of the way the wire arches around the bead. This is just me being picky, I'll be honest. Anyway, once I've got that curve that will go along the top of the bead looking nice, I'm going to pop it in, and then I'm going to wrap the rest of the wire around the shaft of the pin, and that's what will secure the bead onto the pin. Just like before, I am using my pliers to help me keep the wire as tight around the pin as possible, and look, a little bit more filing. And once I am fully satisfied with the shape of the coil underneath the bead, as well as the point of the pin, that's it. It's all done and ready to go. I hope you enjoyed watching this COS tutorial. And again, I want to thank Courtney for not thinking it was weird that I wanted to do a follow-up video to hers. I really hope you enjoyed this. I hope this inspires you to give pin making a try on your own as well. Thank you guys for watching. If you want to leave me a little something, you can check out my Ko-fi, and I'll see you again soon.
Today is not a context day, and props to all of you who like wearing wimples. I don't. They make me feel frumpy. Freedom.